All right, it's your main man, Professor J. Pillar Bay. We're reading Tropical Dependency, page 55, 56 by Lady Lugard. It's called the chapter Empire of Two Shores, right? African history. So we're going to go right here. All right. It says, in 1061, dissension breaking out amongst the tribes in the south, Abu Bakr returned to his desert kingdom, leaving his cousin Yusuf Tachafin in command of the north. This proved to be a final division. Abu Bakr succeeded in his reconciling his unruly tribes, and to give an outlet to their energies, he led them to the conquest of Negroland, which is Africa, right? The northern border of which he overran for a distance of 90 days' march from his own territory. They should have carried him to the Hausa states, but he returned no more to take command in the north. In the year 1062, Yusuf laid the foundation of the town of Morocco with his own hands, and not long afterwards declared the independence of the northern kingdom, of which was to become the capital. Abu Bakr acquiesced, and Yusuf, left to himself, continued the conquest of northwestern Africa. By the year 1080, he had long been the supreme ruler of that portion of the world. His court had begun to attract the learning and the civilization which civil war was driving out of Spain. And we are told that it was filled with Arabs from the frontier town, which had submitted to Alfonso, right? They used the word Arab to have the Moorish, right? These men, with tears in their eyes and sorrow in their heart, had come to Yusuf to implore his protection. It was to this court and to this man, Mutammed of Seville, came in 1083 to ask for help against the Christians. Who are the Christians? They used the Christians that had what? The word European, right? So these are Africans versus Europeans in 1083, right? AD. Yusuf is described as a wise and shrewd man, neither too prompt in his determinations nor too slow in carrying them into effect. He had passed the greater part of his life in his native desert exposed to hunger, privation, and had no taste for a life of pleasure. It is expressly said of him that he did not speak Arabic. When therefore he consented to cross over into Spain, right? And in the course of time drove back the Christians, the Europeans, and established once more a supreme sultan on the throne of Andalusia. His conquest and the dynasty which he founded must be regarded as an African conquest and an African dynasty. Let's read that again. His conquest and his dynasty which he founded must be regarded as an African conquest and African dynasty. The Almoravides ruling in Spain were identically the same race as that which, moving from the west, imposed Islam on the races of Negroland, to Africa, establishing kingdoms of which we shall presently hear along the courses of the Niger and the Senegal. So Africans imposed Islam on Africans. Pay attention to that. It stated that when Yusuf crossed to Spain, there were no tribes of the Western Desert that was not represented in his army. And it was the first time that the people of Spain had ever seen camels used for the purpose of mountain cavalry, forming part of the army which fought at Zalaka in 1086. There were also some thousands of blacks armed with Indian swords and short spears and shields covered with hippopotamus hides. Now, don't take that as, oh, it was blacks with them. They were all black, but these certain so-called black African people, they had Indian swords. But the whole army is mostly Africans, right? If not all, right? This battle drove the European forces out of southern Spain and led the foundation of Yusuf's Spanish Empire. When, after fighting it, Yusuf marched to Seville, the comforts and luxury of that town, far from raising in his mind the admiration and astonishment that might have been expected, impressed him with very different sentiments. His counselors and courtiers pointed out to him the advantages which power conferred in a civilized country. It strikes me, he replied, that this man, meaning the king of Seville, so this is him saying, he's an African saying, look at this African, talk about the African king. He said, it strikes me, he replied, that this man, meaning the king of Seville, is throwing away the power which had been placed in his hands. Instead of giving his attention to the good administration and defense of his kingdom, he thinks nothing else than satisfying the craving of his passions. Not long after, when Yusuf had returned to Africa, his generals informed him that the whole of fighting against the Christians, the Europeans, was left to them, while the kings of Andalusia remained sunk in pleasure and sloth. They asked for his instructions, and he ordered to conquer the king of Andalusia, and to appoint to every city or town, as it fell into their power, a governor from among officers of Yusuf's army. Town after town fell to the army of the Almoravides, till Seville itself was taken, and the king sent a prisoner into Africa, where he died. So that's an African man conquering another African man because he feels like he's not taking care of business to keep the Europe, to fight against you. This guy basically like, hey, we fighting these Europeans and you sitting back, sunk in pleasure and sloth. Does that mean anything today? So he like, hey, go conquer them kings and them African kings in Spain, and we're gonna take over their spot to make sure that we won't get conquered, right? So they sent the king to prison, which I don't know was that the best idea. They sent the king to prison, which I don't know was that the best idea, but he died. The king died in prison in 1095. Yusuf died in 1106. His son succeeded to the Sultanate of North Africa and Spain. And the Almoravides dynasty continued to reign with a double court, one in Africa, one in Spain, right? The Sultan residing alternatively in either until the African dominion was overthrown in 1142, and the Spanish dominion 3 years later in 1145. The last Almoravid sovereign of Africa and Spain, according to Ibn Khaldun, executed in the presence of the Almohad conqueror in 1147. So later on, his descendants was killed, right? As far as Yusuf, by another African, right? During the whole of this period, as under the dynasty of the Almoravides, intercourse between Spain and Africa, Negroland, was freely maintained. So when people try to tell you, oh, the Moors in Spain were not African, look what this lady said. When therefore he consented to cross over into Spain, 711 to 1492, Africans ruled Spain, right? In the course of time, drove back the Europeans and established once more a supreme sultan on the throne of Andalusia, which is modern-day Spain. His conquest and dynasty, which he founded, must be regarded as an African conquest and an African dynasty. So somebody said the Moors in Spain was not African, it wasn't black. This lady said it was an African conquest and it was an African dynasty in Spain. So that's this book. Come on. That's this book, A Tropical Dependency, page 55, 56, Empire of Two Shores. So what happened here, though? The African man came to him and said, can you help us fight against the Europeans? He came and helped him fight, but then he noticed that the guy who asked for help wasn't even fighting himself. And so now it's like you got me to a fight and you're not even helping me help you out. And so I had to take you out. But I don't know if that's the best idea, but you see what was going on early on. Like, he's like, hey, we can't even risk it. His soldiers came back and said, hey, man, we did all the fighting against the Europeans while these African kings of Andalusia remained sunk in pleasure and sloth. And then you see, we were ruling in Africa and Spain. So this is your main man, Professor J. Pillar. And as you can see, what she say, it was blacks that had Indian source, but the whole army was African, right? So this is your man, Professor J. Pillar Bay. Get your library up. Know your history. I love you. Ashe, ashe, ashe. Keep learning. Peace.